Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of the Real Producers Partners podcast. I'm Ken Tucker with Changescape Web, and today I'm joined by Courtney Fricke of North Shore Real Estate Investor Association. Welcome, Courtney.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. So, as a partner for Real Producers, I've been with them for a few years now,
Okay.
and so I'm not a licensed agent. What I have is the Real Estate Investors Association. Most areas have one where it's kind of like a meetup meant to educate. Well, it's also meant for networking for investors, and so I run the one of the ones in the New Orleans area, and but through that, so I do a lot of education for the community on real estate investing and things like that. So obviously, I'm a real estate investor.
Okay.
I consider myself a more so a creative real estate investor. The normal types of deals, I those seem to elude me.
All
So.
right. All right. Well, tell me what do you see as creative real estate investing?
So really, that says, you know what? My favorite way to look at it is, you know, hey, when people say, Courtney, you are an out of the box thinker. What I've learned from learning from throughout the years through various cycles in real estate, the creative real estate investors have, they've shown, especially during down times. Um, but I like to think of that as what box? There's really no box to get a deal done. So many times we're so used to the conventional and traditional methods, but for me, anything's up for grabs. I have I had some underneath my desk, 40,000 baseball cards. I plan to use them maybe as a down payment on a house or for so there's many different currencies. It doesn't have to be your normal makeup of how to do a deal.
Hmm. Okay. So how do you find those opportunities?
That is an excellent question. And usually that's the one everyone says, oh, no, you can't do that. But I mean, I bought this house where I live creatively. Even my own primary residence. It comes from finding people who have a problem and they need a solution. Sometimes the market is the solution. But this house right here, it wouldn't sell based on its condition, based on the price that the seller needed, and the seller is facing foreclosure. And so I was able, and here's the other thing: is other investors was, making cash offers, and all the cash offers were below what this guy owed on his house.
Hmm.
Um, and with some other issues, we looked at multiple different options, and that's usually what I do. I say, hey, let me take off my buyer hat. Let me say, hey, here are your options so you can make an educated decision for your family. And maybe only one or two of them is doing business with me. But
Yeah.
again, as an educator in the community, I care about helping people. Like, I care about solving the real estate problems in my community. And great, sometimes I buy houses too,
Yeah.
not always.
All
And
right.
so,
Cool.
which is, again, the Real Estate Investors Association is a part of that. Every month, I write an article actually for the New Orleans Real Producers magazine on solving these types of problems as well as investing. And I'm on the radio every weekend as well. And so I do that a lot. So I lead with that foot of being, a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
Um, and I say, hey, I'm one of the options. I don't have to be the option. There might be a better one. Go that route.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I approach my business. It sounds like very much the same way. I mean, educate first. That's really the key. That's where my passion is. And that's what gets me excited. I love trying to help people figure out,
Yeah.
in my case, the crazy world of digital marketing. So yeah. So tell me, we're kind of in a strange economy.
Sure.
Have been for a while. Tell me, what's investing like in a shifting market like we're seeing?
That's a really good question, and it's a question I believe many people are asking. So I do go and like speak at real estate brokerages and whatnot as well. And sometimes I'll get, that's probably one of the most prevalent questions I'm getting right now is what are investors doing? At the end of the day, the idea of an investment is usually it's towards some future goal, right? Like I'm investing, maybe it's someone's retirement. So I've got rental portfolios in 2 states. That's a big part of my retirement plan, right? Here's a major factor though is I mean, we all know people who have owned real estate but have lost it, right?
Right.
Especially when you go back to '08, '06, '07, '08. We know, most people know someone who's made money. Most people know someone who lost money. And then there's some people who just went through survival mode.
Mm.
So the difference between that is your plan. I think a big part of that is the risk factor. I was talking with a lender the other day, and we both talked about how a lot of times investors don't know when to get off the roller coaster. And so a big part of that is obviously the market has been really high for these last few years. And a lot of people, um, we call it like having a yield sickness, like, wanting to get such a return. And it's, there's like, oh, well, I want to get a return, but they're not seeing the impending, issue. So a big part of that is just being, mindful of risk. And so down in Louisiana, we're seeing a very strategic, well, not a strategic, very special issue that not the rest of the country is really seeing, and so we're having to be very strategic with things. It's the insurance issue that we're having down there that is taking an already interesting economic time and making it even more difficult because we're struggling getting affordable insurance rates if we can insure the property at all.
Hmm.
So those
Why?
things are causing us to have to be very cautious.
Yeah. Why is that?
The last few years, we've had some major hits.
Yeah.
So, the hurricanes, we had a tornado,
Sure.
things like that. And so, between that, and then inflation, the rising cost of materials, the rising cost of labor, the demand on materials as well. So, imagine the last 2 years, what the country's gone through, then imagine having to help a significant part of a community rebuild.
Hmm.
Um, but they were only insured for a small amount.
Yeah.
So if you're only insured for a small amount, but the cost to fix it is now exceeding that because of inflation and these other factors, what happened is I think we're now, don't quote me on this, but I think we're between 8 to 10 insurance companies have gone belly up in the state of Louisiana.
Wow.
And so at that point now, the state's having to step in and they're in receivership, and the state's having to, work on giving people payouts for their policies. That happened, you know, a significant, like it happened over a year ago now, right? For
Hmm.
Ida, the real big one. But it's like, so those issues are coming into play.
Wow.
And so right now, all of our renewals, so for example, I've got a commercial policy with my rental, policies on them, or that's very common for investors, right? Um, we're expecting, like literally our insurance person is telling us expect a 30 to 40% increase on what you're paying right now.
Wow.
And there's just nothing we can do about it because there's so few players who are insuring in the state right now. Many have stopped writing policies, they have left the state. And so a big part of that is, they're putting limits like, hey, we only want to have so many, multifamily policies in this parish,
Mm.
or this. And so, for example, it used to be 30 companies that they would give me a quote from, these underwriters. Now we're looking anywhere from 1 to 4.
Wow.
So in some areas, with it just being that one, it's usually the state one, and that one just, it sucks.
Yeah.
It's a policy. It's not a good policy.
So FEMA doesn't provide any help for anything like that?
So it's not just flood insurance; it's the building insurance policy, and
Okay.
so that's making it. So they're really trying to do things at a state level, but I mean, it's a
Yeah.
dumpster fire. It's to give you an example, so I mention them on the radio every weekend. Most major metro markets have a home improvement show,
Mm.
and I answer live calls for 2 hours every Saturday, and I answer all the real estate related ones. We had a homeowner who had a larger primary residence, but just to cover the building, so not the flood, was normally 6,200 a year. But again, nicer home. Um, their renewal came back at 18 grand.
Wow.
And with playing with the different deductibles and with, making some adjustments, the cheapest they got was 13,000. So what is that going to do to their ability to afford those monthly payments? on
Yeah.
top of everything else
Oh, yeah.
happening, right? But also their ability to resell it.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
those are the factors we're looking at down here, which again, if you're only looking at it through the normal means, um, it's you have your normal squared, you're trying to fit it through a round hole, you're struggling. Like, yeah, just not quite being able to get to where I'm wanting to get. And so a big part of that is, hey, what are some ways that hey, we're hitting a wall, right? In the greater New Orleans area, we're hitting a wall. How can we get around it? How we can get through it? So no matter what, going back to the original question, in a changing market, you've got to assess risk. So I know some investors who are leaving the New Orleans area. Um,
Hmm.
I know I'm working a few house packages of like, well, basically it's a portfolio of all their rental properties. The second thing is spreading out the risk. Where sometimes it's in, so for example, I own rental properties in 2 states. Maybe it's moving it, where it's not all, within 30 minutes of each other, maybe going an hour north or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So if somebody wanted to get into real estate investing, how do they go about doing that?
The first thing they need to do is get educated. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times people, I refer to this. I say, hey, when people say I want to invest in real estate, it's like walking up to the counter at the airport and saying, hey, I want to fly to Europe. That's not going to buy you a ticket, right?
Right.
It gives us a general direction, but that is definitely not something you can start, packing for this, that, or whatever. So a big part of that is figuring out what do you want to do? I call it building out a business plan, right?
Okay.
Because everyone's like, oh, HGTV, let me flip. I can tell you I've flipped a significant amount of properties, and I hate it. Like, so I now try to avoid it. Um, and so she's really figuring out how you need real estate to serve you. Because look, if you need retirement, you shouldn't flip. Like, that is not retirement money. That is a job. So, but most people, they're not educated enough to know that, right? So
Yeah.
the best investment most people can do is get around some investors who are doing what you want to do. Maybe you're saying I don't know what that is, so I always recommend to go find like what I run, the local real estate investor meetup. They're all over the country. The New Orleans area has multiple. Go do that, get around investors, immerse yourself in the culture and say, hey, start recognizing when you really resonate with something that someone says or that they're doing and say, hey, let me learn more about that and kind of go from there.
Yeah. So if somebody is going to move into the investment space, uh, do they typically get connected with property managers and folks who help them, or do a lot of people take on that burden as well?
No, that's a good one. Look, I'm a firm believer that real estate is a team sport. So no matter what you do, people do need to build out their team. Um, and when it comes down to management, I have a few properties within my portfolios that we self manage, but then a good bit of it is outsourced, right? Like third party property management.
Right.
That doesn't mean mailbox money for like there still needs to be some management of that relationship, of expectations, of hey, what's going on. Um, and not all property managers are created equal. But at the end of the day, management is a skill set. So whether you possess it or you hire someone who possesses it, you need to know what that skill set looks like to be able to recognize it, either training it in yourself, like going and getting training, or knowing when the person you hired is doing the right job for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember back in college, I actually, ironically, I wound up doing an internship for a guy that I wound up renting from later after I was in my graduate studies, and he chose to not only be the investor and owner of the properties, but he was also the handyman, and he owned several, and he would be gone for weeks at a time because of his job, or he also loved to go into the mountains and just
Yeah.
be dropped off for 2 weeks, absolutely no contact, and just live off the land and basically survive and just and so there was no way to get a hold of him. So in retrospect, I'm thinking it probably would have been a smart idea for him to outsource that. But yeah, but I think I mean, some people may see it as a hobby. They may enjoy doing it, but if you're looking at scaling, then I think it definitely makes sense to partner with somebody who can really take that on, especially if you're dealing with multiple properties.
So I'm a big believer. So I've been having this conversation a lot actually. So I call someone who's a mom and pop landlord, that is someone who owns just a few properties or maybe just one, right?
Yeah,
Um, that mom and pop landlord, it's no matter what, I'm a firm believer that you have to treat the real estate you own as a business or you won't own it for very long. I mean, because I buy from people all day long who they've owned it, but they didn't build wealth through owning it because they mismanaged it. They didn't manage the finances or the repairs or the tenants or whatever.
yeah,
And so you have to treat it like a business. So that includes things like having a reserve, reserves for when, the roof needs to be replaced or for ongoing repairs, or hey, if the tenant's not there to be able to pay the taxes and insurance or the mortgage, if there's no income coming in, right?
right.
So you got to treat it like a business in order for it to pay you like a business. But so I believe that mom and pop landlord model where they do a lot of the stuff themselves. It's really like a hobby. One of the biggest things I say, be careful because I think that model's going, is a dying breed because with the rising cost of everything, they're the ones who, are, and also the tenant landlord relationship is changing and stuff like that. Uh, that's what I'm seeing. So much of the issues right now is with those mom and pop landlords because they're getting hit really hard.
Did that change in part because of COVID?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
we saw a lot of that happen. A lot of investors really opened their eyes during COVID. The geopolitical climate, one part, and that was very very unique. I mean, there's still places still trying to be able to evict tenants, right? Um, who are still trying in certain states. So that was one of the reasons why I started investing in a different state.
Yeah.
Because I saw that, if you had all your eggs in one state, it was really interesting to see how that state responded, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, or like you said, I mean, if you're within 30 miles and all of your properties are within 30 miles, with you guys getting hit with
Yeah.
hurricanes, I mean, that's a risk. And, you might want to think about diversifying your portfolio.
Yep. So that geographical diversification, so that was part of it because obviously we had some major I'm still going through some of my insurance claims right now,
Hmm.
as well on my properties, and so that was another part of it is if you have everything you own in one area, obviously down here we're prone to hurricanes and other things. So it's just a way that again it's assessing that risk and knowing when to pivot, um, or to look at things like don't be wrong. There's benefits of having everything within 30 minutes. Like I understand it's a lot easier to build your team within a
Sure.
30-minute radius. It is not easy to build multiple sets of teams because not everyone's willing to travel.
Right. Do it by design though, not because you
Absolutely.
didn't think about the risks.
Absolutely. 1000% invest by design, not by default. And too many people do it by default.
Yeah. All right. So, how would you recommend somebody start to work with an investor?
So one of the biggest things I tell agents is, you have a lot that you can provide an investor, but you need to first assess the investor because at the end of the day, there's different levels of investing. So there's something I call HGTV syndrome, right? Everyone's seen the TV shows.
Right.
Um, I kid you not. I have one of my projects, because I'm not going to be getting to it for a while. I put it for sale, gut it. I said, you know what? The market's starting to shift. Let me just list it. And so we had it listed. And long story short, we're having people who are like, yeah, we've watched some TV shows with, I'm like, that is a 6-bedroom gutted house. Like, please, no. Like, that is not, I would not wish that on anyone unless they were a contractor, right? Like they had the skill set.
Right.
Anyway, so I'm dying laughing with that, right? Because there's a level there that really is something that's plaguing, our current industry, because that's an outside force that's telling people, oh, it's not that. Look, I've never flipped a house in 30 minutes, right? And they make it look so easy in the show. So
Right. Right.
um, one of the biggest things is you got to assess it, right? So generally, I say you've got either a green investor or you have a sophisticated investor. Like myself, I'd be a sophisticated investor. So I'm not licensed. So when I collaborate with agents, it's generally for access to a property for them to go make an offer for me. Or they're representing for, say, whether it's me selling off some of my rentals, which I recently did, or, because right now I've reassessed my portfolio. So I said, hey, there's a few that I want to sell with the insurance, the changing market. So a lot of that is they're not having to really educate me through the process.
Right.
It's not my first rodeo, not my hundredth rodeo. So it's like, got to assess that. But here's the other thing, is that if that person is green and it's their first rodeo, you've got to really make sure that they're educated. Because I mentioned earlier, if someone wants to get started, they need to educate themselves. Because I find that very few people are just so gun ho that they'll pull the trigger without the education. They're going to look for some sort of, hey, can you show me, like, what's a good deal? Right? Like, how do I know it's a good deal? Or when to pull the trigger. So for agents, you really need to assess. And then for someone who's really green, assess where they're getting educated. And if it's through you, like that person as an agent, well, they need to say, hey, is this going to be a major investment of my time? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so just
Yeah.
really saying, hey, okay. So for example, with our real estate investor association, we have a lot of agents who will attend with a new client of theirs, or all of us, our stuff gets recorded and put on our YouTube channel. And so they'll send, agents call them my podcast. It's not a podcast. It's literally just a recording of an event. But okay. They're like, oh, I send your podcast to people all the time. I'm like, I get what you're saying. But
Right.
it'll be an hour plus long training, on
Yeah.
property management or on doing a flip or whatever. And so I say, hey, find a legitimate source. So those local real estate investor associations, or whatever that looks like. Bigger Pockets is a fantastic like website that has podcasts, forums, webinars, books.
Hmm.
I've got an entire stack of their books right here, and I don't even own all of theirs. Um, that is a real estate investing place that is trusted by the majority of investors.
And what
So
was it?
it's a Bigger Pockets. It's a
Okay.
unique name.
Yeah.
So, but so a lot of times I tell people, their biggest podcast, because they now have like, I don't know, 6 or 7 different types of podcasts. But their main one, which was their original podcast, I think it has over 500 episodes, and they're an hour long. And the majority of it is them interviewing, investors. So you get a whole gamut. I mean,
Yeah.
apartments, mobile homes, short-term rentals, flips, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so I tell people, go, so with agents, I say, hey, go listen to those, educate yourself as well. So, because if that person is wanting to advise someone on what a good investment is, many times in a description of a listing, it'll say calling all investors, great investment. And so they usually always call me because, my role as an industry leader, they'll call me and say, hey, Courtney, I have a listing coming up. It's a great investment property. And I'll usually say, can you tell me what makes it a great investment property?
Yeah.
Um, and that's where I start to say, hey, like, I want to listen to see what that information. Oh, well, it's under 100,000. I could still overpay at 100,000. You know what I mean? Or so it's one of those things is understanding what those things. So get educated yourself. but have education resources to point people to, and then assess the agent, the investor that the agent would be working with. Because I know many agents who don't like working with investors because they got with a whole bunch of new ones who they did a lot of work, a lot of handholding, and they never pulled the trigger.
Hmm. Okay. Wow. So, do you see any opportunities coming up? I mean, this weekend the Senate just passed some new initiatives which
Mhm.
are going to provide some funding, I think, for replacing hot water heaters and maybe putting solar on people's homes and things like that. Is that going to create any opportunity, or do you see any other opportunities like that on the horizon?
I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm literally, I just finished a book this morning on it was like a huge study on the Federal Reserve. I got in the industry in 2014. So I've only been up through, a rising market.
Yeah.
So I am absolutely a student of all of this. But I have very specifically sought out mentors who have been investing since the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And so I go spend a lot of time with them. One of them I go spend, multiple times a year, I'll go spend a week with him in
Mm.
Tampa to go say, hey, what are you seeing? How are you acting now? What are your thoughts? What should I do for my first changing market? Whatever time may tell becomes of the market, right? Um, I want to get around people who've been through multiple.
Right.
And my understanding of that Inflation Reduction bill that was passed is that is going to be one of the factors that continues to cause more issues. At the end of the day, the printing of that money is causing issues. So the hard part here is going to be staying power. So will there be opportunities? I think so. I know it because my phone has started like ringing a lot more. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so I've already started to see it. Obviously, we're hearing all that, but one of the biggest things is that I cannot I cannot take advantage of those opportunities if I'm not in a position to weather the rocky storm too.
Yeah.
Especially down here in Louisiana with the rising cost of insurance and things like that. I'm not protected from it. I've
Right.
got rising cost as well.
Yeah.
So, I like just recently sold one of my properties and I utilized a, real estate specific CPA. He's actually a part of he's a New Orleans real producers partner as well.
Okay.
And we created some tax strategies so that I can keep that cash rather than have to pay Uncle Sam. I said, okay, what are some tax strategies so I can pay less in taxes because I need that money to weather the storm.
Yeah.
Um, so with that being said, as a creative real estate, historically, the deals I've done, and I've done over 200 now. The majority of them, I would say probably 60% of them, I bought with cash. Um, that cash came from everyday average individuals. Some of them were top producing real estate agents who made a lot of commissions and said, Courtney, I don't have the time, but I want to get the return. So I said, okay, I've got the deal and my team will run it. They backed me financially, right? Or it
Okay.
might just be the lady who no longer likes what the certificate of deposits give at the bank,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
So everyday individuals. But then the other 40% or so has been creatively. So that's buying with seller financing, buying on, a bond for deed, buying it subject to the existing financing, like all these creative options. One of the biggest things, not only am I being told to prepare for, but I'm preparing for is that number is going to greatly flip. Um, so where I'm going to be buying more of my stuff creatively because those properties cannot sell the traditional way, you know, whether
Yeah.
it's because interest rates are too high, it's because maybe other factors like insurance or, whatever.
Right.
And then, just cash is not as easily, is not the answer that it's been, the be all answer that it's been. And so with that being said, um, I've been doing that for years. And it's not me begging someone to lend to me. do owner financing because I don't have the money, it's generally because my cash doesn't help them either. Whether it's that cash is not enough for what they have to get, like what the loan is owed and stuff,
Hmm.
or if they get the cash, it just goes and sits in the bank too, making nothing.
Right.
So that's a problem that when I talked about finding problems and solving them, that's a very real problem that I find and solve often, where they're going to make less than 1% if it goes sits in the bank. Um, and so ultimately that is where a huge part of that is understanding how to create those deals. They're not found, they're created. Um, and it's, again, just because I might get that property on payments doesn't mean I don't need to have money. I need to have money for, you know, when the roof or the water heater or whatever.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
again, that's another part of the strategy is to make sure I have that dry powder ready. Um, so that's been part of my plan is having a significant amount of cash, not to go buy properties with, but to have enough reserves so that I can buy enough, so I can buy, a significant amount of properties creatively.
Yeah. Okay. So, tell me, what is the most interesting property you've either purchased or invested in or flipped?
Hmm. Um, I've had a good bit of them. This one's there's always the fun stories. I've actually been starting to try to go on social media and start telling my stories. Just recently I drove around with someone's ashes buckled up in my car that we found in one of the houses. I didn't know who it was. The sellers didn't know who it was,
Wow.
because it had been in the family for I think 3 generations,
Okay.
and then had been a rental property for a long time, and no one knew whose boxes of ashes this was. Um, and so they're buckled in my front seat, and I drove around with them, and I was like, "Buddy, this is rude, but I don't know who you are. I can't invite you into my house." So until I found the funeral home that would that could probably take it. So um, so I've got a property that I have right now, that it's the one I mentioned. It's a larger 6 bedroom house that's gutted. It's one that I am finally selling. I don't mind going and renovating it, but I get bored with that. My skill set is in deal structuring, raising money, and really solving the more complex issues. That property, which I bought through Facebook, not through a Facebook ad, not through Facebook Marketplace, but through someone was complaining about a vacant mall on a Facebook group, and a
Hmm.
few people tagged me because people were talking about how it's bringing their property values down. And I say, well, one of the main things, like, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I don't buy malls.
Right.
But I do buy the vacant house in a neighborhood that's bringing down your value. Um, and so some woman, so I just shared, hey, I went there as a kid. I wish someone would do something with it too. But someone messaged me from that conversation, and it's about a house that was right next to her mom that had sat vacant for over 10 years. And she said, it's such a beautiful home. I hate seeing it sit.
Hmm.
This house was built in 2004 and has sat vacant since 2009.
Wow.
And it's on an acre, 6 bedroom, 3,000 square foot, So when I got it, this was in 2019, it had 2.2 million in liens and judgments against it,
Hmm.
just riddled with, lawsuits and stuff like that. Um, and so I tracked down the owner. Um, and the owner actually was a contractor and a realtor. And they didn't believe they still owned it. They thought the bankruptcies had gone through, the foreclosures had happened. And I said, look, he said, Courtney, 30 to 50 people a year call me about that house. I tell you the same thing. I don't own it. And I said, look, before you hang up, I believe you do. And if little Johnny down the street is bored enough and goes and breaks into that house and breaks his leg, um, I believe professionally that he's not going to sue whoever you think owns this. I believe he's going to sue you because I believe your name's on the title still. Um, and I'm pretty sure you probably don't keep insurance on it. So I said, I believe that you own it so much that I'm willing to pay your hourly rate for your attorney to go ask him 2 questions. And you know what? If I just spend that money and it's a loss on my end, it's a loss on my end. You will know for sure because I'm
Yeah.
sure you haven't asked your attorney and paid for him, you know. And he said, okay. He called his attorney, and 2 days later, he called me back and he said, oh my goodness, I still own it. What am I going to do?
Wow.
Um, and so I said, well, you could either put insurance on it and, you know, have it still tied to you with all those liens and judgments, or I could buy it from you subject to, it was like 35 different liens and judgments and like all these different creditors. So he decided to go to my attorney. So I bought it with all that clouded title. And I just started going through it, you know, one by one, picking through it to where now it's ready to be sold with no creditor issues at all. Clean title. Um, not it was not an easy task, especially being that yeah, some of them were harder than others, but my file for that one's about this thick. Um,
Wow.
and that one is a deal that so it's under contract, it's being sold. I did not renovate it. So I did not go make it pretty. That is not my skill set. Um, but it is a deal that I have less than six figures into it. But I will profit more than six figures
Hmm.
on the sale.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, Courtney, I enjoyed talking with you. What's the best
Likewise.
way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure thing. If you guys go to that Courtney10k.com, it is a digital business card. So my email's on there. But and you can see my phone number on there. My social medias are on there. So I will say, you know, you can call me, you can text me, you can email me or social media, whatever's your preferred method. You know, we monitor them all.
Okay. All right. Cool. If you had one ask of our listeners or watchers today, what would that be?
So one of my biggest things is I I want to encourage people um, that when you resonate with someone, um, build on that relationship. So, for example, if you're a vendor and agent in the greater New Orleans area and you want to learn more about the creative real estate investing or investing in general or solving these problems, let's go have lunch.
Yeah.
So that's my ask.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed talking with you.
Likewise, I
All right.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Courtney. Take care.
You too.